Folks, again, Rob, I'm editor-in-chief here at the Princeton Review. I am just delighted to be here tonight, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel discussion. We have an exceptional group of 6 panelists that will fire on every point of this issue on equity and inclusion around college admission. They will be offering their insight, of course, their opinion, and their good and clear counsel. Truth be told, however, this is the first panel discussion that we have given in a number of months at the Princeton Review, but it is well worth the wait. I am convinced with mathematical certainty that this will be a treat for every student, parent, and counselor joining us tonight. I want to underscore that we commit to each of the folks on our virtual meeting tonight that you will exit with a deeper understanding of equity and inclusion in college admission in its component parts. That's research and applying to school, standardized tests, the SAT, the ACT being the Grail, but also AP exams. And then third, the idea of navigating the college cost and financial aid process to your best ability and with fearlessness and confidence. We will be speaking about each of those issues tonight through the lens of race, ethnicity, inclusion, heritage, whatever the nomenclature is that you feel comfortable with, certainly, and that you identify with. All are welcome at our online discussion today. And of course, we will be in the service of you defining how schools can be a best fit for us academically, campus culture, financial aid, career services. Those are all unapologetically pretty big buckets, but we will unpack the trunks in each of those buckets tonight. Just to give a quick intro to myself, I'm editor-in-chief here at the Princeton Review. I've been at the Princeton Review a little over 20 years. Truth be told, however, I taught my first SAT and then ACT course at the Princeton Review, tail end of Ronald Reagan's administration. Finally, I am getting lots of the questions on the SAT and the ACT right. But that said, I'm responsible for content and lots of different channels at the Princeton Review, our books with Random House, lots of content up on our website. And I work with a wonderful, wonderful team creating our product, our SAT, ACT courses, AP courses, and then on down the gamut, as well as all of our college admission information. But that said, what I really love to do, I spend most of the academic year on the road talking to 3 groups, students, parents, and counselors. All of those things moved conspicuously online last March, as it did for you all. I'm doing many more events now, but I'm so grateful for each of these opportunities to speak with students and parents and counselors. So thank you so much for your time. I am going to move on to share the camera and the microphone with each of our speakers on our virtual dais tonight. We're going to start with now my dear colleague, Dr. Cynthia Colón. Dr. C, I'll take it away for a quick introduction, and then we'll move on down the line.
Fantastic. Hello, everyone. I'm coming to you live from Los Angeles, so it's 3 o'clock here. So welcome, everyone. Just want to share that I have worked on both the receiving and shipping ends of the college admission process. I got into this work really because as a daughter of an immigrant mother, she was the one who championed my dreams. She knew what my dream college was, but she did not know how to access that. So she was courageous enough to ask questions and find someone to help us through this process. I continued in this work later on in my life when I was working at Vassar College in college admissions and recruiting across the country. I realized that there are a lot more families just like my mom and myself who know very little about the process. So today I spend my days championing teens' dreams for college and helping them find their academic strengths, helping them find their coolness factor, and helping them write essays that are compelling to help maximize their college choices. Welcome, everyone.
I love it. Dr. C, thank you so much. I did get to listen to a couple of your podcasts over the last couple of days, including the first one with your mom, and it was a real treat. We'll look now to LeShane Sadler, directly from the glorious Golden West. LeShane.
Yes, coming to you from sunny San Diego. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining this conversation tonight. I serve as the Director of Admissions at UC San Diego and have served in this role for the last 3 years. Prior to that, I served as the Associate Director of Admissions at the University of Notre Dame. I work in admissions. I was a teacher, taught high school history for 13 years, and so I've seen both sides of this. As a high school person, and as well now on the other side as an admissions officer. But here in sunny San Diego, things that you can find and things that you can do. We have over 140 plus majors across 8 different disciplines. We're the second most applied to school in the nation. We just became a school that represents Division I sports. So maybe in next year, we'll see us in March Madness and take us all the way to the Final Four. Who knows? We'll see. We are on the ocean with 300 plus days of sunshine. And Washington Monthly named us the number one school in the country for social mobility, which means that students, when they arrive, wherever they come from, whatever walk of life, however they enter, when they leave, they are in position to be just phenomenal in the workforce, but their community. So thanks again for allowing me to be here tonight. Looking forward again to the conversation.
LeShane, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure getting to know you. I'm really looking forward to your good counsel tonight. Thank you so much. Dr. Romero da Silva, Yvonne, we're going to look to you for your intro.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Yvonne Romero da Silva. I am the Vice President for Enrollment at Rice University in Houston, Texas. I've been in the admission profession for over 25 years. In fact, that's how Dr. Colón and I first met, and worked at MIT, Stanford for a short stint, the University of Pennsylvania, and most recently at Rice. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for the time. I have to say, we are big fans of every one of the schools up on this list, but Rice has been a perennial favorite on our best financial aid list. I know that that's something that that comes up in conversation for you all the time, but we thank you so much for your time. Lenny, we're going to look to you, Lenny Foreman, who is my, Lenny, I will let you introduce yourself before I give all the accolades about you, but you have the stage.
Thanks, Rob. My name is Lenny Y. Foreman, and I am the Director of College and Career Coaching at a little high school in downtown Brooklyn called City Poly. And we are a early college high school. We also provide students with career and technical education, as well as an AP for all high school. And I've been working on the side of helping young people and families navigate the college and post-secondary landscape for going on 14 years now. And I love the work in part because, similar to Dr. Colón, I felt that there weren't many resources for my family growing up. And my dad found a book at the library. I think it might have been a Princeton Review book. And so we started to look through that. And then he went to a workshop. Actually, my mom went to a workshop where she learned how to at the library, advocating about financial aid. And she learned that you should always ask if a first-year scholarship can continue on all 4 years, if it can be guaranteed. And that's what helped me go to college. And so I think a lot about these moments and these interventions, right? Where somebody offers their insight into a really difficult, complicated process, like we've all chosen to do tonight, and the gift that it can offer. And I'm just grateful to be among really esteemed colleagues and to have real conversations about what it's like for students whose identities may have historically not been represented in higher ed, what it's like for them to show up in the process and what it means, both the pros and the cons, and for us to make a more embracing, more radically inclusive space within higher ed and within post-secondary advising. So thanks so much, Rob, for inviting me. And thank you to my fellow panelists.
Excellent. Well said, Lenny. A pleasure to have you here. Dr. Talley, Braque Talley, we're looking for your guidance, and it's such a pleasure to see you and to have you on the panel too.
Thank you so much. Braque Talley, currently serving as the Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management and Student Success at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, the flagship of the Arkansas Delta. Just wanted to mention that we pride ourselves in being an institution that takes students from oftentimes seen as marginalized backgrounds, propel them to excellence. When you start looking at people like Dr. Samuel Smokey Norfolk, Grammy Award-winning singer, Dr. Samuel Kuntz, who perfected the kidney transplant, L.C. Greenwood, or even Dr. Charlie Nams, former president of Indiana University. Start here at UAPB, go anywhere. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
It's great to see you, Dr. Talley. Thank you so much for the time, and really looking forward to your insight tonight. Mr. Morrison, Rodney, looking forward to your intro, and thank you so much for being here too, sir.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Can you guys hear me okay?
Perfect.
I've been in the basement for about a year now, quarantined, so I might get a little excited at some point. And again, Rodney Morrison, I've been I've been in higher education for over 25 years, like Dr. Colón and Dr. Romero. We've known each other for quite some time. And I'm the Vice President for Enrollment Management at the University of Delaware. And for those of you that don't know much about University of Delaware, we're a public land grant, sea grant, space grant institution, but we're privately governed. And so we're an R1 doctoral program, 18,000 undergrads, about 4,000 graduate students. This is where the first study abroad program in the country started in 1923. And we are one of 5 schools in the country that can say we have a graduate who is a US president and also a Super Bowl winning quarterback. That would be the Joes. So I'll give you a hint for those of you that don't know. You can look that up.
I love it. I love it.
Thank you. I'm here. I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight. Thanks.
Excellent. I love it. Yeah. I mean, University of producing Renaissance people, all the, you know, for you. And I didn't realize that about the first study abroad program. And without question, it's in my noggin now. Folks, thank you all for that. And I just want to allow Tanreka Smith, my wonderful colleague from Princeton Review, to say hello and introduce herself as well.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tanreka, and I am the Florida Outreach Specialist for the high school market. I'm very excited about tonight's conversation for a number of reasons. One, just like Rob Franek, I enjoy talking to students and counselors, but also two, I'm also a proud graduate of a historical Black College University, Wiley College in Marshall, Texas, that afforded me many wonderful opportunities like being on the speech and debate team and also being Miss National United Negro College Fund. So I'm excited about the insight from the panel, and Rob, take it away.
Tanreka, it is such a pleasure to work with you, and thank you so much for this, folks. And we're talking directly to all of our audience members. Folks, please know that we have all been circulating some prime the pump questions just to make sure that we have no blank air over the next hour or so of time. But that said, the success of tonight's panel discussion doesn't lie with any one comment from any one person on our virtual panel. We really do hope that this is a discussion of the collective enlightened, certainly all of our 6 panelists, but then all of you as well. Tanreka has already graciously volunteered to be our eyes and ears on the discussion or on the chat specifically. Unfortunately, there are quite a few of you out there, so we had to put everybody on mute, but your voices will be heard via Tanreka and the chat. So volley questions our way. Do not feel that you're obstructing any of the conversation or interrupting the conversation in any way. If you have a question on any point that any person is making, volley it to Tanreka and she will volley it directly to us. I do want to set the stage just very quickly for our first question. One of the things that Tanreka and I work on this in our team at the Princeton Review, we have an annual survey at the Princeton Review called College Hopes and Worries. It's now in its 18th year. The new data just came out less than 2 weeks ago. And I bring this up because it's a survey of college-bound students and their parents. And we found out that out of the 14,000, little over 14,000 college-bound students and their parents that completed the survey this year, we asked them this question: when choosing a college, what is the most likely deciding factor? And out of the 14,000 folks that answered it, 41% said best fit, 39% said finding the best program for career interest of my choice, little itty bitty 11% said academic reputation, and 9% said most affordable. So I just want to focus on this idea of finding fit. And I now feel like I know all of our virtual panelists pretty well, and we are all united in that idea of finding fit. So this idea of our first question, when thinking about ethnicity, race, heritage, and inclusion, what steps should students be taking to find that idea of fit through that channel? And then for the admission folks on the panel, what are schools doing to find that best fit class? I don't want to call on anybody specifically, but I will look to you for your comments. Don't feel obliged for everybody to answer this question, but that perspective of best fit through the channel of, again, race, ethnicity, heritage, inclusion, the topics that we're discussing tonight from a student perspective, and then from a admission perspective at school. Maybe LeShane, do you mind taking the first answer?
Sure. Yeah, I was looking to see who was going to unmute. And
okay, I know it's a hard one. Yeah.
So I think looking through the lens of, you know, as a underrepresented student myself, and looking at colleges, looking for fit. one of the things that I always looked at, and then one of the things that I always advise students when they think about an institution, they should also look through it through the lens of not where you are at 17 or 18 years old, but where do you want to be and who do you want to be at 45 or 25 or 55 years old? Who is the most important thing? You can go to a lot of institutions, many institutions, and study engineering, study physics, study to become a nurse, a doctor, or a teacher like I used to be. But there's not very many institutions that really fit to the person that you want to be, who you want to be. So I always say to look at institutions with a very keen eye. Look at, and some of our panelists already tonight have shared some of their great alum that have graduated from the institution and gone on to be great servants, whether it be in the world of politics or sports or the like. I think you want to look at what the school has produced and see yourself in that school and saying, wow, I can become that. We have an alum that is recent alum that has over the last year walked on the moon, took a flight out into outer space. She came here not necessarily knowing what she wanted to study, but she knows she wanted to go far. And so I share that in saying that if you want to go far, UC San Diego is a place that you could possibly even end up on the moon. But any institution and many institutions are great fits for a lot of people. But when you think about that, I really want you to think about not just is it a fit for the 4 years or 3 years or 5 years that you'll be on that campus, but is it going to be a place that you will feel unbelievable about saying, I represent this institution as an alum and be associated with all the other great alum that have traveled and went and experienced that institution. So fit is a great word. But look at it carefully as you explore your many college options and opportunities.
LeShane, we totally hear you, and I so appreciate your guidance on the next 4 years and then the rest of our lives. And that is I think sometimes students may feel challenged by that, but everything that I hear from you in that regard is it's awesome opportunity, that this opportunity exists for students to find that best fit school now and through the future, and that's so exciting. Thank you. Rodney, I'll look to you.
Yeah, I agree with LeShane, and I just want to add, because I think this is important. How do you figure out, how do you get to what's a good fit? Right? And I'll tell you a quick story.
Yeah.
I'm a first generation college kid from Philadelphia, and I remember getting lots of mail, and I wanted to play basketball in college, and I wanted to potentially do business, is what I thought at the time. And just so anyone on the call knows, just about every student changes their major at least 1, 2, 3, 4 times. But anyway, I remember getting mail from this place called the Wharton School of Business, and what I said was, they don't have a basketball team. I'm not going to apply there. So and that's sort of an insider joke there for those of you that don't get it. That's just a business school that's part of a larger school, the University of Pennsylvania, at which I didn't even connect the dots. And so that's what I'm getting at is it's important that you ask questions, right? There's no dumb questions in this. And it's important that you think about all the things that are important to you. And there should be someone on campus that can address all the areas that you're thinking about exploring, whether you're interested in music, whether you're interested in things like community service, social justice, bands, sports, et cetera, et cetera. All of our institutions have people available for you to talk to in those areas. Could be a faculty member, could be, you can ask for students that attended your school. And actually your high schools might even have some of that information. So never think that you have a dumb question, and always ask. And we all have all these virtual programs now because of COVID. So you don't even necessarily have to visit to at least start your research process. So that's really the key, is ask about all those things. Ask about our student organizations. Ask about our personal support. I have 3 kids. 2 of them have have learning disabilities. If you're in that situation, make sure you ask about what services are offered and available. And again, that's what we're here to do. And whether it's virtual or on campus, we're going to all have services for you to get at some of those good questions.
Fun. Rodney, I so appreciate your comments, and I totally hear the, unapologetically asking questions, students, parents, to be fearless around the process, and to be, to have access to students and administrators and faculty members, virtually or otherwise, can still build that strong support. So we totally hear you and applaud the answer. I'll look to our colleagues if somebody can comment, if you feel comment specifically on how admission teams themselves, from a strategic perspective, are finding those students that are the best fit for them, specifically through our equity and inclusion lens. And I'll Yvonne, yes.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that on. One thing I did want in terms of advice to students is that before you even have to ask, you should see institutions signaling the communities that they value. And so it shouldn't be hidden. It should, if it's important to you and your voice is presented, it should be reflected in the communities that they are celebrating, in their promotional information, in their websites, in the YouTube videos, in the TikTok streams, anywhere you're connecting to that institution. If it truly values a myriad of voices brought to the table, then it should be easily reflected and not forced. Right? As you're just seeing a random video of a student kind of doing a day in the life, as you look behind that student and you see into the spaces and places on those campuses, do you see diverse voices? Do you see diverse perspectives? And I think that then gives you an idea of what that campus is like and what it is that they truly value. I think and a second thing, I would like to move off of the term best fit, because I think one of the things that I value, having worked in higher education my entire professional life, is that higher education in the United States is such a strong and amazing industry. And there are so many incredible opportunities and so many institutions, wonderful institutions for students to have an opportunity to be educated at. Some are going to be better environments. Maybe that's the right word we should use instead of fit, but better environments for students than others based on the culture and the values of that institution. And I think that's why students love to come visit our campuses, because they want to feel what it's like to be there and see who they would be going to school with. So from an admissions perspective, I'll flip and I'll put my admissions hat back on now. I also really think that if institutions are exercising holistic evaluation or valuing varied voices, that they're really looking at students as individuals and not just numbers and statistics. And so you will see that reflected in the admissions processes, in terms of how those admissions processes are practiced. If, for example, it's a state institution and they allow any student who meets these criteria to have a seat in that institution, then that's just saying, if you exhibit this level of academic achievement, we want you here. So that's one style of admission, all the way to the other end at a place like Rice, where we do holistic evaluation, and we get the common application, we ask additional supplemental questions, and we have specific questions that talk to your perspective and voice that you bring to the campus, because our residential college experience is so important. So we actually ask students to identify components of their perspective and lived experiences, culture, so to speak, that they feel they can contribute to the campus and add to the layering of voices that exist on our campus that will improve the learning experience for the students that we go that students go to school with. I think one of the great fallacies in America is that only individuals of color or only LGBT voices have different cultures. The fallacy is that there's a macro American culture, and the reality is that is not true. Culture is through all sorts of different layers and what we call multiple identities. You can be first generation going to college. You could, it could be an income element. It could be, your family's lineage prior to arriving to the United States. If your family is not closely identified or associated with Native American communities, every other person brought culture to the United States. And I think the fallacy is this belief that it's only the students of color who add that layer of richness. And I think, and even students of color, you find multi-generation, like multi-college generational students of color who have this disbelief that somehow that they no longer have any uniqueness to bring to the table. And that's what actually, if there's a big disappointment in college applications, that's often it, that kids don't see the uniqueness that they bring to the table, whether it's being a 5th generation farmer from Ohio or from a Vietnamese, 3rd generation Vietnamese here in Houston. There's just such a millions of voices, millions of experiences that we have that opportunity to see that are being lived all around the world, and to not recognize that you bring something so unique just because of the shoes you've walked in and the life that you've been exposed to. You should feel proud of that. You should celebrate it and want to showcase that to the college or university that you're applying to, and hopefully they value that in what they see in you.
Dr. Romero, I so appreciate those comments, and I know it will resonate with the students here, and certainly taking away those comments as we move forward, that this process of admission is a human process, and admission teams across the country, or across the planet, try to embrace those unique issues that each student is bringing to the table. That message is not lost on us, and I suspect not our crowd. So I so appreciate you bringing it up. I think if you don't mind, Lenny, please go.
Thank you. I just wanted to add my thoughts on what students can be thinking about and looking for, because that's what I'm immersed in all day. And I just want to amplify some of the things that panelists said, right? So LeShane talked about, where is this place going to help you get to in your future, right? How will it be jet fuel for your future? And then, Mr. Morrison said, okay, what exists there at the institution itself to support you? And I really appreciate Dr. Romero talking about, let's get rid of the idea of best fit, right? It's not a pair of shoes, right? It's a multifaceted institution that you're going to join as a member of. And because it is an institution, all institutions have histories. Right? So we talked about, think about your future, think about the present, but also an element that very few students think about is, what is the history of that institution, right? Where was it created? Who made it, right? We've uncovered a lot of research in the last 30, 40 years about the ways in which certain institutions were created by enslaved folks. And then institutions are doing work to provide some form of reparations to descendants of those peoples, right? I'm in Brooklyn and I'm repping Brooklyn, but this is Lenni Lenape land, right? Not Lenny, my land. This is Lenni Lenape, the indigenous people's land. So all land and all institutions have a history. And you can research the history of the institutions that you're looking at. We don't think of that as a column in the college research spreadsheets that we make, but all universities have rich histories. Some have complicated history. Most have complicated histories. And you want to know what that history is walking into it, and know what you can offer it, and know what you will bring to that history, and then what future you will create as a part of it. And then the last piece I just wanted to say is that Leora Johnson, who used to work for Brown University, shout out to Leora, she now works at Baruch, I believe still. She once, in a panel that I heard her speak on, talking about underrepresented students, she reframed and she said, instead of saying underrepresented students, what if we said historically excluded students, right? Because not all institutions were made with all of the multiplicity of identities, like Dr. Romero said, in mind. And so if you belong to a group of students who may have historically been excluded from college, right? what does that mean that you are now a part of that institution? Or what does it mean to join an institution where you are where you were welcome from the very beginning? And so those are some things that I encourage my students to do, that higher level thinking, because applying to college is just one process. You're going to do it once, right? But the skills that you can develop as a part of it, you will use for the rest of your life. And that piece of thinking about the history of where you're going is so, so important. And I encourage all of us to think about it.
Yeah, totally hear you, Lenny. And the idea of the confidence that understanding that history, as tough as it is at many schools, can bring confidence to the process. Students, parents, counselors helping along the way. So totally understand the comment. Folks, I do want to just shift a little bit. I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about test prep or not test prep, but the test optional movement, and specifically through the COVID lens. And I'll just set this up. I'll refer to that survey that we had chatted about before, College Hopes and Worries. Again, 18 years that we've been collecting this data from college-bound students and their families. This past year, and this has now been consistent for 8 years, there are 3 big worries for students and parents causing great stress in the process. Number one, not too surprising, I'm sure, to everybody listening, the amount of debt that students may likely incur to pay for college. A very close second, standardized tests, SAT, ACT being the grail, AP exams close behind, and then third, actually completing college admission applications and financial aid applications. But it's that second fear around the SAT and the ACT specifically that I just wanted to focus on a little bit. Through our COVID lens, we understand that test optional, even pre-COVID, 1,000+ schools were already test optional, meaning that you needn't submit the SAT or ACT for academic admission, although students can choose to submit it should they wish. But now, given COVID, we know that hundreds and hundreds more schools have added to that list, some temporarily, some embracing that policy moving forward. The question that I know we all wanted to hit on, and I'll look to our panelists for their comments, is, students that so how are students, and I don't want to say underrepresented student groups, but those who were historically excluded, I'll use Lenny's nomenclature, will they profit from test optional as we know it now through COVID, and may that extend moving forward? Is there a strategic advantage to test optional as we move forward?
I'll jump in here and acknowledge, number one, that the pressure that students and families are under when it comes to standardized testing. It's a personal story. I was a college football player at the University of Notre Dame. And at the time, Notre Dame only accepted SAT test scores. And I'm originally from Iowa, and Iowa's an ACT state. And so I took the ACT as a junior, took it again as a senior and all that stuff. And then when I started getting recruited to play football, and I chose Notre Dame, they said, all right, have you taken the SAT? And I was like, nope. And they said, all right, the only way you can get in is if you sit for the SAT and score this score, right? Not just run a 40 in this time, but you now have to score this score. Your grades are great, but you need to score. And there was one test date left for me to be able to sit for that exam. And again, just a little bit more, come from a single parent home. I have 2 older siblings and a younger brother as well. And so mother that morning, when I was getting set to take this exam, she got up early and made me a huge breakfast, right? And we had to drive over an hour to get to this testing site to take this exam. And I hadn't prepped or I did anything like that, like many students do today, or maybe even many students did way back then. But I had this one moment, this one opportunity to score the score that I needed to get into the school that I dreamed of going to. Fortunately, everything worked out. I got the score that I needed and was able to go and play football and all that good stuff and get an unbelievable academic experience. But I understand and acknowledge from personal experience the pressure that students are under. Whether it's an advantage or not, for us, this is our first year going what we call test blind. In an admissions process. And it's nearly impossible to say right now if students are I'll put in a new term, global majority, all right? If students in the global majority are going to benefit at all from this process. We did see an increase in applicants from that population But right now it's just so early in this to know if the students are going to benefit from it for us, from our perspective. But I know other schools have been doing it for multiple years, so I'd love to learn a little bit more about what other schools and institutions may have, how they respond to this question.
Excellent, LeShane, thank you so much. And I should have mentioned to our crowd again that you're from UC San Diego, as we can see on the back on your background. But again, through the California system, starting in June of last year with the recommendation of your now former chancellor to the board, and moving test optional and then test blind fully for the California systems or throughout. A tectonic shift, no question. And you're right, I'm sure the paint is still being applied on those things as well. Dr. Talley, I'll look to you if you have a comment.
Thank you. I wanted to share that I think in order for us to take advantage of this as institutions of higher education, we have to put our students first. And when we review this, many institutions change their admissions policies not to be a better resource for students, but to secure their institutional enrollment and the vitality of their institution. So understanding that, we have to do the second side of that. We have to do the second part of that, which is to support these students once they get in our institutions. So one of the things that we've done at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, and we're blessed to have seen an enrollment increase in the middle of in the pandemic, retention increase and a graduation increase all in the pandemic as well. But one of the things that we've done is we're not test optional, we're test flexible. And what I mean by that is students can take the ACT or SAT, but if you elect not to, I need you to take the AccuPlacer upon coming to my campus. I need to know where you are academically, because I understand that many of these schools that our students come from historically have failed my students. My students haven't failed the schools, but the school districts have failed my students. And understanding that, I can't point the blame, but my job is to try to take my students from where they are and propel them to excellence. And that's what we're committed to do at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. And having them take the AccuPlacer test lets us know what classes they're ready for. So, and I'll wrap my comments up with this. I believe that much of doing well in college is psychological. So if I get in a class that I'm not ready for and I bomb out on that class in my first semester, then I believe that college isn't for me. But if I get in that class and do well, I believe, man, I can do this thing. So that's why I have my students take the AccuPlacer test so that I can make sure I'm putting them in the right classes. And then we put the support systems like student support counselors around them to ensure their success while they're here. And I think that's what colleges have to do in order to protect the institution and the student as well. Thank you so much.
Of course, and Dr. Talley, I appreciate your comments. I am going to now use the idea of test flexible, and totally. I don't always think about the AccuPlacer, but you're right. It's something that could be predictive or allow us to allow for student persistence and success once they matriculate. Totally get it. And I'll remember the comment. Other voices that we want to hear from on this question, or I'm happy to move on. Mr. Morrison.
Yeah, Rob, I think your original question was an interesting one, and I believe it was something to the effect of, do students from underrepresented backgrounds or historically excluded backgrounds, benefit from test optional admissions? And, I want to be clear that, I don't think there's any historically excluded background that's a monolith in terms of, testing, right? And so, in other words, we shouldn't assume that any person of color is going to benefit or not. I think the answer, one of the most popular answers in admissions is it depends. And I think, if we dig a little deeper, we might see some trends of sort of not just sort of the historically excluded, but really the students coming from this historically under-resourced schools, right? And again, not all students from historically under-resourced schools will do poorly on a test as well. Although they might tend to have a bigger uphill wall to climb. So and we started seeing in Delaware a few years ago, and in 2017 we went test optional for the entire state, and the reason why was we started seeing and hearing from students and guidance counselors and parents when we would list our well, our average SAT scores, our average ACT scores, that it would turn some students off, and students would say, oh, I can't get in there. And that was the opposite of what we wanted. And so, that was really the impetus to say, listen, we don't want, we don't want someone to say no before they actually, apply. And we wanted to send a signal that, the most important factor is not what you do in a one-day standardized test, but what you do over the 4 years of high school, and not just your grades, but looking at the rigor, and not just looking at your grades, but as was said earlier, a holistic approach to activities and grit and drive and all of those things. And so leading with that versus leading with what the SAT score is, we saw an increase in applications because of that, particularly from historically excluded or underrepresented backgrounds. So just wanted to add that.
That is excellent news, and I saw that idea of the holistic review on the University of Delaware site. I appreciate Dr. Romero's comment on that same topic, and I know that you have been embracing that idea and seeing these increased student populations that are historically underrepresented, and so I totally hear that, and the idea of the crushing blow that students can feel at the very beginning of the process when they just see a test score, and then crossing that school off of that list for that same reason. We also see at the Princeton Review students crossing a school off the list just because of a high sticker cost, that not taking the next step of having the conversation of affordability and, of course, finding that ideal community or an ideal community. Tanreka, I'm sorry I haven't asked you if there are questions from the crowd or questions from the audience. And folks, again, any of these topics, we slightly touched a little bit on financial aid. Certainly happy to discuss those things, but Tanreka, I'll look to you if there are questions from the audience.
Hey, Rob. Yes. So Karen asks, given the current climate, would we suggest that is the reason for these conversations that we're having around diversity, equity, and inclusion? And then what advice would you give through that lens for a student, specifically a rising senior applying to college?
So given our times, COVID times, removing of or embracing test optional, at least temporarily for many schools, we're seeing rises in applications. Is it just timely to have this discussion on equity and inclusion? And folks, I will look to our dais.
Yeah, Tanreka, thank you for that question. But as you were asking it, I was chuckling because Rodney mentioned earlier that Cynthia and I have known each other for many, many years, doing this work for many, many years. So I don't see it as these times. These have been the same issues that were in place, maybe just a different jacket on it, but it's still the same challenges. And I think maybe the difference of late over my arc of being an undergrad and then working in higher education in the 90s and early 2000s into today is that the awareness is much more broad today, especially after last year. And even the phrase, things like white privilege, and understanding that there is a benefit to being in society and an oppression directly or of sorts for people who don't sit within those dominant characteristics. And I think it's just more. There's a greater cognizance of it, I think. It feels that way to me than those who've been ringing this bell and leading this charge for so many decades. I think about when I was first at MIT, I led I was a coordinator of multicultural recruitment for the university, and one of the things I did was a 30-year trend analysis to see what multicultural recruitment was like at the university, pretty much since the early 1970s, or in the 1960s, I guess, which is the first time when doors started to open at historically white institutions for students of color. And so the history hasn't been very long in terms of allowing for access, but I shake my head sometimes because I feel like we should be further along than we are. But I think, again, the cognizant of this idea of systemic, broad systemic mechanisms that are in place to hold diverse voices back and down and out of those opportunities. I think there's just a greater awareness and a willingness to talk deeply and truly, and you're feeling it on campuses as well. So at Rice University, these were issues that we had been talking about, we were aware of, but and we're bringing to the fore. But I think there's an accountability today that we, that administrators nowhere can just sort of say, well, that's not a thing, or that'll blow over time. It's not. I think there's just a recognition, and the difference, I think, is the students coming to campus. They used to internalize the marginalization as somehow being that stereotype threat, how somehow I didn't deserve this spot. And I think the students coming in are far more aware that there are larger pieces at play in our broad American society that exclude opportunities of education, of access, et cetera, and so they no longer internalize it. I'm not saying we're fixed and that everybody's past it, but they internalize it less. They have ways and language and terms and faculty and administrators who say yes, that and validate those feelings of, I'm here and yet it feels a little strange, and pushing us to be even better. And so when I mentioned earlier about being in collegiate environments that are willing to have those tough conversations, if that's important to you, then you should look for places that, aren't just celebrating a perspective once a year or for a month, right? That this is part of the curricular offerings and things that they're talking about of multiple communities, not just your own, but other communities, our Muslim communities, et cetera, et cetera. And so, but I am eager for the day when we're not having to talk about this anymore. I don't know if I'll ever live it, but I'm eager for it.
Dr. Romero, I so appreciate your comments, and that idea of students coming to campus, understanding that faculty and administrators see them and hear them for all the uniqueness that they bring to campus, and having the ability, the confidence to have those kind of conversations. I so applaud it. And I should say, we've been writing about all of your schools for a number of years and rankings, and Rice particularly, other than I had called out the financial aid superlative, but that there are different variety or diverse voices, certainly at Rice, but then specifically those diverse voices interact well with one another. And that is a takeaway, I think, for so many of our schools have that same common thread, but I know that Rice has been superlative in that way, and I've always appreciated that environment that I understood was existing on your campus. Tanreka, I will look to you if there was another. Did we answer the second part of that question? We're good?
I think Dr. Colón has their hand raised.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Dr. C, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit, because the question is always is right now is this conversation new? Is this happening? And as Yvonne just talked about, we've been doing this work for so many years. And Yvonne, I'm going to call us out again. I don't know if you remember the very first year that Bill and Melinda Gates did the Millennial Scholars. We were flown out to San Francisco to read applications in a room where there were computers. This is a long time ago, but I clearly remember reading applicants from Atlanta, Georgia, and thinking this student was so amazing. And I thought, why didn't anyone say to this student that they should apply to, I mean, you name it, this kid, I thought, gosh, this would be a really competitive applicant for any number of schools at top schools across the country. And the student, it was a he, didn't have them on their list. And so I think what this has been able to, hopefully, if nothing else, yes, as LeShane said, they've seen an increase in applications from historically underrepresented students. That's one of the benefits of being test optional, test blind, having these kinds of conversations. But hopefully it's also encouraged adults who are in the business of championing teens, all teenagers, are also looking around the room, looking in their classroom, looking wherever, and instead of just saying, oh, this student should apply here, or this student, they're looking at and saying, you know what, I need to open up and encourage someone, because at the end of the day, teenagers need someone who believe in them. And when an adult looks you in the eye and says, you're really smart. Have you ever thought about this? Have you ever thought about college? Have you thought about applying to Rice, Northwestern, to wherever, University of Delaware? Have you thought about it? And that moment, as Roberto Espinosa talks about pivotal moments, those are pivotal moments for students. And when we create those pivotal moments, it opens the mind of a student to something that maybe they didn't think of before. So hopefully, if nothing else, this is encouraging not just students to think about a wider variety of colleges, but encouraging our adults who are supposed to be in the students' corners to help them think more broadly as well.
Dr. C, I so appreciate that comment, and you and I were talking yesterday about how many students we actually get to present to, right, in live audience, online or off, and it's a very powerful message that you note, and I so applaud it, and I'm looking forward to attending some of your discussions. But that idea again of I see you, I hear you, and I'm confident in what you're doing and what you can bring to the table at so many schools, and then furnishing that, teeing up that discussion for for that student and their parents and other adults in their world to have. So I so applaud it. Thank you so much.
I'd love to jump in, Rob, if it's possible.
Lenny, of course, yes.
Thank you. I wanted to just reflect on that question about whether or not this is new. And then also I saw some comments in the chat around LGBTQ students. So I wanted to just, as your resident queer, say something, not to assume anyone else's identity on the panel. I'm just very out and loud and all about it. So, none of this is new, right? And yet there are elements and ways in which it is new, right? There's language that's new. There's like frankness that's new, right? I could not have been openly a genderqueer guidance counselor in the New York City Department of Education and not worried about losing my job, right? For being who I am 10 years ago. So that's new, right? My students could not have seen me and oh, maybe that's, I fit that as well, right? So I think that one area in which, when we think about equity, that is quote unquote new, is colleges and families and students grappling with particularly trans identities and within the college admissions process. And I've done a lot of conversations with college admissions counselors who are so well-meaning, right? And are super confused by this, right? So I would say if there are any trans or trans questioning students out there or families out there or colleges listening, right? Like I think it's on us as adults to do better by our trans students, right? At whatever institution we're at. And we may think, oh, we did a safe zone training, like we're good, right? But that's like saying like, oh yeah, I like read a book about racism, like I'm good, right? It's just not, that's not enough. So I guess what I would say is there are some new, I would say maybe in the last like 15 years, shifts around the ways that college admissions counselors start to ask about identity. So like on the Common App now, it does, like certain colleges can ask questions about sexual and gender identity, right? Students have, depending on the college, has options to go by a preferred name, right? And colleges are always like, but what if they say that my preferred name is fart face? Like what if? And I'm like, well, then you call them fart face and you say, welcome fart face to our institution, right? Because we have to take kids seriously if they're being ridiculous, right? And sort of making fun of something that for another young person is so important.
Yeah.
Right. And is life-changing, because for trans kids, particularly trans young people of color, right? The risk of harm to themselves, being kicked out at home is so huge. So we as admissions counselors and we as counselors need to do the work on behalf of students. And students, be wise in the way that you approach adults, right? Like, you don't have to be terrified to tell anybody, but you know, are they doing the work? Are they trying, right? Will they be a safe person for me to share this with? And I should say that, you know, colleges are getting better, but they get better when you push them. So don't be afraid to be pushy. You know, it's not going to mean you don't get in if you're pushy. It means they're going to notice you in a positive way, right? Like positively pushy. That's what I like, you know, a little nourishing nudge. So I would say in terms of thinking about LGBTQ students, particularly LGBTQ students of color, I've put some resources in the chat. But again, that point, I think Dr. Romero said about we're bringing multiple identities with us, right? I am both a white person, I am a Jewish person, I am genderqueer, I am, you know, I have an able body and invisible disabilities. Like all those things are coming with me to college if I'm going to college. And I don't even have to say any of those things, right? Many of those disclosures are optional, but there is benefit when, you know, students ask, well, should I check this box, right? And knowing that you check that box in part so that the institution can know who's coming and have some research, right? To track over time. Did our students graduate on time, right? So this is a side note, but one thing that I would push for when you're looking at institutions is the data, right? Like, do students of color, so I work with predominantly Black and brown young men, right? So looking, like, splitting out the data that you might find on College Navigator, which is US government sort of college website, right? What percentage of Black young men graduate in 4 years as compared to other students? Is it the same? Is it not? Right? Like, what is happening for individual populations? If they don't have data on your individual population, ask for it. Because more people who ask for it, they will create it, right? So know that you have some agency and some power to encourage institutions to do better and to do more and to always be growing. And folks like the esteemed colleagues on this panel who've been doing this for 20 or 30 years, you know, they get frustrated with that incremental change that they've seen over time, but their movements have been pushed by students to change, right? Or their own work when they were students. So, particularly with LGBTQ students, I think that there is some shift and some newness, and you know, not all institutions are safe and welcoming for any student. So you know, like, come with an open heart, but also like some sense of protection of like what, you know, what will live for me here when I get here. I'm going to stop rambling.
Lenny, we appreciate the comments. And as Lenny had said at the beginning, we both serve on an LGBTQ special interest group at the New York State ACAC. So did totally applaud the work that you do there and your other co-chairs, and I appreciate the resources that you put in there. That idea of belonging, the idea of, you know, LGBTQ students and how do that, wherever they identify and when they identify with those groups, and for us as, you know, higher education professionals being able to discuss that with them as they move through the process. Dr. Talley.
I just wanted to quickly add, I love that previous comment by Lenny. I think it's one thing to get in college, but it's another thing to get out of college. And I think that's where looking at those stats makes sense for you. Look at how they look for you and students who are in your group. And I quickly wanted to go back to your first question as well, talking about fit. I think the best way to see if you belong at an institution, I won't use fit, but I'll say belong, or if it worked for you, is quantitative and qualitative data. I like to tell students, go to the classroom and go to the cafeteria. Sit in on the classroom and see how that goes, and then go to the cafeteria and talk to other students when they're in their relaxed environment, to see how that goes as well, and to see if you can find someone with a similar background and talk about their story and how it could fit your experience. Thanks.
I do love it. I feel like those are the way that we create content at the Princeton Review. We have a great deal of quantitative data, and then the qualitative data directly from student opinion. I mean, I read a lot of books for Princeton Review about college admission, and you know, sometimes I'm not always the most popular guy because of it, but really I'm just the messenger in this. We're just taking the data from students, qualitative as it is, opinion as it is. Totally applaud what you're saying, Dr. Talley. Dr. C, I'm going to look to you for this next question. What, how do students stand out? This is a perpetual question through the admission process, but guidance that you get. I know that you work individually with so many students and their parents, and that idea of standing out through the process. And then if we can get an admission colleague as well to give us some strategy in that regard. Dr. C, I'll look to you.
I love this question.
Yeah.
And I also love what Dr. Romero was talking about, that we all bring something to the table. So it's not just, I know we're talking about equity and inclusion in college admissions. So it's talking about students of color and LGBTQ communities, but everybody brings something to the table. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that teenagers make is underestimating what they do bring to the table, their own uniqueness. And when they can sort of find their authentic voice, and I'm going to use these terms that we all use, and then I'll unpack them and explain what we mean by that. But being authentic, being true to yourself, finding your own personal story, standing out and being unique. So we throw these out and then we don't explain to teenagers what that actually means. So to give you an example, one of the students I'm working with, she's a young woman from Chicago, and she's applying to a summer program, and she let me read her essays. And her background is so special and unique, but she went on and she just felt like she needed to use sort of big words and have a good opinion about racism and tell what her opinion is and why. And she was sort of telling a lot of things, but not really sharing about who she is. So farther down in the essay, I found gold, when I said, this is your gold. And she describes the apartment they live in, that she shares a room with the sister, that there's a 3-bedroom apartment with 1 bathroom for, I think there's 3 kids and 2 parents, so for 5 people. She then describes, her school life, and she sort of does a compare and contrast, showing me what makes her life. She doesn't have to say, I have less than, or I come from less than. She doesn't have to say that, but by showing through her storytelling and really being true to herself, instead of trying too hard or overthinking the question or overthinking what they're looking for, you just have to find what's authentic to you. And that takes time. So when we talk about standing out, what we mean by that is that in a pool of tens of thousands, literally, there's only so many topics a teenager can write about. There's only so many experiences they've had. So many of them are the same, and many applicants will look the same. So the only way to stand out, and by the way, they all have similar AQs, academic qualities. So the only way to stand out is really to find your voice, find out which stories shaped who you are along the way as you grew up as a young teen and to now, and how you share that. So that's how you stand out and become unique. It's not really that the story is different, right? There are plenty of kids similar to her from Chicago, from an urban area, who have a similar story to her, but it's finding the right way to share that story that's true to yourself. That's how you stand out. So hope that's helpful.
I think incredibly helpful, and the spirit of what you're saying, and I think that is so useful to so many students, the unique situation that you come to the table with. I think, Mr. Morrison, you were saying the idea of grit, perseverance, character, strength of character in the process, and we've been following this along at the Princeton Review, this group called the Character Collaborative. The idea of taking things that are human, qualitative, right, and making them into quantitative metrics in the admission process, and that idea of grit and perseverance being the drivers. Mr. Morrison, I'll look to you for comment there.
Yeah, I think Dr. C said it very, very well. I'll just sort of emphasize a couple of the points, and I think it's important to really think introspectively about what makes you, right? What can the student communicate their passions, their interests, and that's talking about themselves versus talking about an issue or something that's important, but making sure that they relate it back to what's going on inside their brain, like how they're actually seeing the world, right? So we want to hear from how and what they're thinking about. And I think it's important to to be able to communicate not just about who you are, but that you've the more selective of an institution you're applying to, they're going to want to know, why are you applying to our institution? What have you done your research? Have you do you have a good sense of how you would get involved? What activities do we have? Those activities, right? So that gets back to you seeing yourself there at that institution and being able to connect. Yes, this is why it makes sense for me, given my personality, given the things that are important to me. I've seen that. I've not only gone to the cafeteria dining hall, but I've actually tried the food and I like it. I mean, that's the difference. So those sort of things, and that is important. If you get to the cafeteria, try the food. But does your personality come out? And when you're either writing your essays or some schools have optional interviews. And I think, Dr. C's last point, don't try to do too much. It's not about using big words that if you're not, that's not part of who you are. It's not about trying to be a humorous writer if that's not what you're good at. Like, don't start that now. Like, don't try to overthink this. And have somebody read your essays to say, is that who you are? Right? Does that really reflect? Can they read that and say, yes, that's you? And that's important to get that critical feedback. And I think that'll go a long way.
Totally hear it. And I love this idea, human process. This is a human process with some quantitative metrics, of course, and I totally applaud that. I do want to, there was one question that I know we all wanted to hit. The differences between public and private schools, independent schools, through the admission process, through, again, this lens of inclusion and equity. And LeShane, I think we're going to start with you. In the California system, you had made me aware yesterday of Prop 209, was it Prop 209, which is affirmative action? Yeah. Maybe you could just talk us through the process as a student applies through a state school in California.
Yeah, before I do that, I want to just add 4 things real quick. Sure. To the previous question. Applying to colleges and universities is a competitive process, competition. Don't shy away from the competition, embrace it, all right? Universities, colleges are looking for students that have intellectual curiosity, students that are curious about multiple things. So be curious in your approach to what you pursue academically. Many institutions also look for what they call academic acrobats, students that are multifaceted, can score 10s in multiple events in the Olympics. All right. So don't just lock in on something that you're comfortable with. I love math, and so I'm not going to do well in the social sciences, or other courses might be your favorite, but be really solid across the board. And the last thing I'll say is just do more. Do more. Any chance, any way that you can do more. And that's fun things that you love, summer programs, enrichment opportunities. All those things will help you stand out in the admissions process and the selection process. So this idea around private versus public. So as a public institution, ultimately our responsibility here in the state of at UC San Diego is to the people of California. So our goal as a campus is to reflect the multinational diversity that exists here in the state of California. And again, as I was sharing with Robert yesterday, we are what we call a Prop 209 state. And what that basically means is that within those parameters of Proposition 209, which was started in 1996, we are prohibited as a state institution from considering race, sex, or ethnicity in the admissions process. But with that being said, the university we engage in outreach and recruitment activities with prospective students and families throughout California, throughout the country, and throughout the world. We do targeted programming and recruitment aimed at increasing underrepresented students to our campus. Programs for first generation students, low income students, those interested in the arts and humanities, that will bring, with everything else, bring their, bring themselves, bring you, the whole you, to our campus. But within California, yes, the Prop 209 does not allow us, in a sense, to admit students based off of any of the pre-mentioned factors. And I did work at a private institution, but since I don't work there anymore, I can't speak about their practices. But here at the UC San Diego, that is one of the things in that we share this Prop 209, but many, if not all, the people in California are aware of it.
Got it. I so appreciate that, Mr. Sadler. That makes a lot of, I think this will be, we have a lot of young folks that are just starting the college process, freshmen and sophomores, that are joining us tonight. So I'm sure that they'll, and their parents, of course, will learn from that process. Dr. Romero, I'll look to you for the private guidance, independent school guidance.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wanted to maybe sort of take a step back and help families really kind of understand the even basic difference between public versus private. And so a lot of it has to do with the funding, and public institutions are typically funded by a government, either more often than not a state government, and in some instances like the military academies, a federal government, and they get a significant amount, or something to somewhat of a significant amount of funding, and they have fiduciary responsibility to the state or government that they are a part of. There's also a mission as well, to serve and to provide educated students to that state, or in the case of the military academies, well-prepared folks for the military and protection of our country. And I think that's one distinguishing factor. And it's also what lends itself to a lot of the state institutions being larger, because they are there and meant to serve the state and be able to educate significant numbers of students who can then contribute into the workforce and contribute into the society of those states. And so that's why you end up with the more often than not, state schools that have larger student populations than the average of the private schools, let's say. But then another lens of that you could look at institutions is selectivity. So even within state schools, even in one state, in one state system, the selectivity levels may be different, and or the requirements may be different. For a private institution, while we do receive some funding, often through the federal government, through our financial aid, the Pell grants and the financial aid available to students, we are not obligated to meet specifications or parameters set by the state, that we have responsibility or onus over the education of those students, setting what we want to teach, the size, and so on and so forth. So it's an element of control and funding that kind of really splits up the public versus the private. A lot of private institutions were founded to meet, and I think Lenny brought up a really great point, that what was their genesis? Where did they start from? What was their history? What was the purpose? And often it was, especially the smaller liberal arts colleges were very localized to a particular population, often faith related. As communities and populations have moved and needs have moved, these institutions, and I think Dr. Talley brought this up, that they've had to respond in order to remain in survival, right? In order to keep their doors open, they've had to shift, either willingly or unwillingly. And that's when I talked about in the late 60s, early 70s, the federal government was requiring them to open doors to women, open doors to students of color in order to get access to funding. And so that's a lot more than y'all wanted to know. But I think it gives you a sense of why there are such a variety of differences. And I think it goes back to my earlier point, or one of the first points I make, which is higher education in the United States is vast. We have such a richness of opportunities in the way that in most other countries in the world, their access is very limited and the breadth of possibilities is limited as well. And so one of the great things about the United States, we have over 4,000 four-year institutions in this country. 4,000, that's mind-blowing. There's so many choices out there and opportunities. And I think a lot of time kids get really worried about those super selective institutions. And I get Rice is very selective. And so I'm, but that the focus is so much on those institutions without realizing that in the United States, we have a significant amount of higher ed capacity. That meaning that there are enough seats for students who want to go to college. There are enough seats in our institutions to for the students who want to go to college, and use this opportunity to really broaden your thinking about where you could go and where you might be happy. And I say this as a mother of a high school junior who is literally going through this process right now. And as he's discovering colleges, I'm like, yeah, that would be great. That would be different, and my job is to be his cheerleader and champion his discovery of the college process and help him to not cut options out too early. To leave his mind open and to think about what is that feel, that fit that we talked about at the beginning, that environment that I want to be in. For him right now, it's urban East Coast schools. He just is so excited about being in an urban environment where he can walk out the door and have life right there at his doorstep, the vibrancy of diversity in life just at his doorstep. And so I think for all of you, you ask yourself those questions, like what is it that you want and that you're seeking in the environments of the colleges and universities that you're applying to?
Gosh, I just love that. I know that will resonate with our students and families here tonight, and we're all shaking our heads. Cumulative, yes, 4,000 plus schools. The 8, 9, or 10 that we are applying to should be, exceptional schools for each of us. But you're right, broaden the lens, and it is not a challenge, it's an opportunity. And I totally applaud the comments. Yeah, excellent. Folks, we have about 7 minutes left, and I'll be respectful of everybody's time. I just want to give a nod to sort of financially cost of college. I know, Dr. Romero, we got to speak a little bit about Rice's program yesterday and meeting student and families need, but I know we have we're all speaking from different students and families that we work with. That idea of financial aid, and I'll just again underscore this survey, the biggest concern for students and parents that we've been collecting now for 18 years of Princeton, the last 8, the number one fear is assuming too much debt to pay for college. Can you give us some guidance and hopefully some solace around this around this process of navigating with confidence the financial aid process and the cost of college process in general? And this is up for grabs. College counselors, everybody's up. Yeah. All right. Dr. C, did you have your hand up, or is that your hand up from before? Okay.
I'll speak on it. Something that we talk about a lot with our students is what is an acceptable amount of debt to go into for undergraduate, right? And how do you even make that determination at 17 or 18 years old, or for a family? So what I'll say is that, the biggest thing that I try to get across to students is that the college admissions process and looking at the cost of college is incredibly confusing, right? And when you look at the cost of a year, right, that's not what every student is actually paying. And so, it's like going into a store, and instead of everything being what it says on the price tag, there's actually a discount amount that you can't access yet until you get to the register, right? And so I try to tell families, don't discount something, right? But also don't assume that something's going to be super affordable just because it's cheaper, right? Rice University might be cheaper out of pocket cost than going to a state university in my own state, depending on your family situation, right? So be ruthless when you're looking at both the out-of-pocket costs that it might cost your family to go to an institution, and also have really honest conversations at home about the range at which your family would be comfortable to afford. So I always tell families to go to a low, medium, and high range, right? Or a low, medium, and high amount. And so for any families, so parents who are on here, or students even, trying to just sort of get into that conversation of like, okay, you know, at the max, like we'd be struggling, we'd be rice and beansing it for 4 years. We could do 12 grand a year, right? Or maybe the answer is we could do 50 grand a year, or we could do 2 grand a year, right? What is the max amount where you could do it and not go into a significant amount of debt? And I think we need to change the idea and language of like a safety school from being a safety school is one I could just get admitted to easily, right? To a safety school is one that is highly likely to admit me, and I can go there without taking on more than the federally afforded student loans, right? And ideally less than that. And that to me is what a safety school is, right? We have to think about financial fit. And if we're not thinking about financial fit, then we're not thinking about inclusion and we're not thinking about equity. And then the other piece is looking at, you know, what percentage of students on the campus are what we call Pell eligible and or fit into this traditionally low income background, right? And what are the supports for those students once you get there, right? So Williams College, you know, has very few, like not a huge number of Pell eligible students, but the Pell eligible students they take real good care of. If you break your glasses in the second year and you're far away from home, they will get you a new pair of glasses, right? So thinking about what are the resources that exist depending on your financial situation. But, you know, I'll say, I just read this book by Stacey Abrams called Leading from the Outside that I highly recommend any young person to read. And one of her quotes is, never tell yourself no, let somebody else do that, right? So don't decide not to apply to something because you're like, nah, I can't afford that, right? Because it's trickier than you think it is. And let the process unfold to figure out whether or not it's going to be affordable to you. There are much more data and much more resources available now than there ever were. And in the 13 years I've been working on this, it's gotten much more transparent. But have those honest conversations with your family, even though they're very difficult to have. And also, you know, decide whether or not you're going to be looking at institutions and don't look at the sticker price really. Or not, don't look at it, but don't let that be a reason to say no to yourself. Let someone else say no to you, as Stacey Abrams says.
Well said, Lenny. I so appreciate that guidance and the idea of bringing that conversation of college cost of financial aid up to the beginning part when we're researching schools, rather than waiting until the end and then dealing with it then. I haven't previously thought about the tiering of different you know, schools and the price range and the financial aid that they could likely get. So that's another good one I'll remember. Mr. Morrison.
Yeah, I really appreciate what Lenny said, and I think it gets back to some of our earlier comments regarding why it's important not to just fall in love with one school, but to fall in love with many schools, because you don't necessarily know how the financial aid, if that's important, is going to pan out. And you know, you don't assume that just because you think you might qualify for X amount of whether it's grant or scholarship at one institution, that it's going to be the same at the other. So I have these conversations every day with our financial aid office, and you know, they would want me to say it's really important to follow the deadlines, understand the deadlines for the FAFSA form, free application for federal student aid, for schools that take the you know, the CSS profile. It's important that you know who they are, and they tend to be private schools. It's important again to follow deadlines and understand that you have to fill these forms out every year. And it's important to know that they don't always get it 100% right, meaning that you know, they're taking a snapshot at the time of when you're filling these forms out. So I mean, COVID's been a great example of, well, things have changed for a lot of families, right? You may now have income may have changed. Parent may have lost a job. Situations could have changed. And so schools won't know that unless you tell them that. And so all of us have processes which you can add more information. They may be called an appeal process. It's critical that any documentation you have, whether they're extra medical bills, whether they're I didn't know about Williams. If you break your glasses, that's fantastic. If you break your glasses, whatever it might be, Documentation of those things is critically important, and being on time and meeting deadlines, because that will, you will thank yourself 100-fold, and that could be the difference. Again, meeting deadlines and providing those that information could mean the difference between being able to afford it and not, depending on the institution. So I'll stop there.
And I so appreciate those comments. And again, looking at the granular parts of this process, totally applaud it. And I'm hoping that students and parents are hearing all these things, and the fear and stress is washing away. So this is good, folks. I'm just gonna if we could just look to folks to close out and give us one piece of advice that you want students to know, if you didn't mention it already or just want to underscore it. Dr. C, I think we're going to start. We started with you. We'll start with you again.
Start early. There's not a single senior that I meet, or rising, junior, rising senior that I meet that doesn't, or I should say this, there's not a single senior who's on their way out of high school that doesn't say, I wish I would have started earlier. So start early, start early, start early.
I'll chime in. I just want to share it with all of you. You've got this. There's going to be a place for you, multiple places for you. And so the fact that you're doing this session and learning about the process is one great step on your road to going to college. And I just wish the best for you.
I love it. Thank you, Dr. Romero. Dr. Talley, or Mr. Santa.
Yeah, I'll jump in here, and I'll leave you with a quote that my son gave me. And it's about your dreams. You will experience success when your dreams become bigger than your excuses. Continue to dream like you will never dream before, because you will accomplish unbelievable things if you don't let your excuses get in your way. Thanks a lot for having me tonight. I appreciate this so much.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much. Dr. Talley, I think we'll move to you.
All right, I'll just quickly, mine is simple. Remember your why. Remember why you're there, why you're pursuing college. Times will get hard, things will get tough, but if you remember your why, you will persevere, and we'll see you on the other side of that stage and meet you at graduation.
Well said. Well said. I love it. Mr. Morrison.
Control what you can control. I mean, understand that what's best for your friends and it may not be best for you, right? Different personalities, there's a lot of noise and there's a lot going on. Focus on what are the things you can control. You can control filling out the application. You can control what goes into that application, right? You can't control, once you send that application to our institutions, what those decisions are going to be, but it's going to work out. Okay. It's going to work out, but control the things you can and let the other stuff go. Breathe.
Gosh, that makes me feel so good. I know I'm not the only one. That is great advice. Lenny, you'll take us out, my friend.
The college application process, like any other gauntlet in your life, is an opportunity to learn about yourself and to go deeper, right? And to start to really look in the mirror and say, who am I today? Who might I want to be? And how might I treat myself really well and sweetly and like a dear friend in this process, right? So I'm going to push a dear friend, but I'm also going to take care of a dear friend. And so, be your own best friend in this process, because, there will be a lot of factors pushing you. And then the last piece is, if you're a student, come up with a very pithy, small set of things that you can say at dinners or events with family members where they ask you about your process and where you're applying to college or what you're doing. Come up with an answer. And if they say, what do you want to do with your life? If you don't have an answer, say, I'm really interested in these things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Write it down, practice it, so that nosy family members leave you alone, and then ask them questions about themselves and they'll immediately stop bugging you. But protect yourself, right? Because people will always want to get up in your business, and they don't always need to, but if you have something prepared, they'll leave you alone.
Well said. On that note, folks, we want to thank you for the last 90 minutes together of all of the speakers on our panel. Thank you from our full team, Tanreka, myself, our full team at the Princeton Review. Thank you for your time, your guidance, your good counsel, and folks in attendance. Thank you so much. Please do. We hope this conversation will continue. This is our first panel discussion, as I mentioned, in a long time, not the last. Signing off for tonight. Be well, folks.